Hi, Dr. Lisle. How are you today?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for joining me for our sixth episode of Eat When Hungry today. It's hard to believe we're at that many.
Yes, absolutely. We just keep
Yes,
rolling along.
we sure do. And today we're going to jump into the topic of satiation and specifically how that um, is part of my own journey as I'm telling my story through my Transform Shadows social media. Part
Yes.
of the whole reason why I developed Transform Shadows was for three reasons. One was I wanted to tell my story authentically about what it meant to undertake a health, wellness, and weight loss journey. In my case, I've struggled with morbid obesity my entire life, obesity since I was in middle school for sure, and weight since I was in elementary school. So this is something that has been part of my whole life, and I wasn't able to find success around a healthy weight until I was in my early 50s. And even then, it has been a journey and a work in progress for me. As I looked at this process from the viewpoint of an educator, I saw that this was really a complex series of tasks that I wanted to bring light to, especially in relation to my own personal history of failure. But I think my failures are also reflected in the larger population. I've often heard that there is a 97% failure rate at maintaining long-term weight loss, and that is without even thinking about some of the very healthy choices that I have implemented that make it even harder. And so I think in many ways we need to look at this problem a little bit differently. And I'm so glad that you are able to join me in this journey to be able to tell some of that story, because in your work, I found a lot and still find a lot of nuances that I think are very helpful for people to understand if they are undergoing this type of journey. And you bring a really rich history of experiences and expertises that play a role in being able to tell that story more completely, I think. So if you would give an introduction of yourself today, that would be, I
Sure.
think, very helpful as we get going.
Sure. I'm Dr. Doug Lisle, and uh, I'm a psychologist. And sort of by chance, I got hornswoggled into the health and wellness space by my good friend, Dr. Alan Goldhammer. And as the years went by, uh, he's a very what you call hyper health arena doctor. In other words, it's not just average health from your average doctor. This is a man that he joined another group of people like Dr. John McDougall, who's a friend of his, and T. Colin Campbell and Caldwell Esselstyn. All of these guys are very much dedicated to serious preventative health in the form of particularly focused on diet, which winds up being the major component in the determination of people's long-term health outcomes. So Alan Goldhammer basically shoved me into this space, and I was the only psychologist in the space. And as a result, it turned out that psychological factors wind up being the most important part of the story. In other words, learning what it is to do, that was complicated enough, but these people did it, going back to Nathan Pritikin and people even before that. There's people have had the notion that we had to have dietary balance changes pretty significantly away from the way people would do them conventionally. So these doctors knew that that was the right direction to go. The only problem is how do you get people to go there? And so that winds up being a frustrating mystery. And as we have a 97% recidivism rate for weight loss, we've got a high recidivism rate for people who try a whole natural food type diet and then struggle with maintaining that and then sometimes abandoning it altogether. That is a psychological journey that is important and parallel to yours. And so that's what I have done. A big chunk of my career has been about that problem. And 20 years or so ago, Alan and I published a book called The Pleasure Trap, which is literally the evolutionary psychology of the modern health problem. It's basically the story of why is it so difficult to go the right direction once you know the right direction to go? And so that's, right in the middle of your own personal journey was, in fact, the pleasure trap, and you finally mastering that problem has been, winds up being the solution to what it is that you were seeking and that others seek.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that continues to just resonate deeply with me, and as I've broadened my space in talking about this with some of the people that I work with, is how deeply rooted this problem is in our sense of well, in our genetics and our biology. And I wouldn't even say that it is the problem within us, the way I understand it from you, but it is the way we are built. And it is really the fact that we are not designed to handle this particular problem. And so from that, I continue to draw the connection that, of course, if we were not designed for this particular problem, it makes sense that the answer is not easy and that the answer is complex. And that, I think, is something that I continue to want to speak to, because a 3-point checklist or a 5-point checklist or a 10-point checklist has not been enough for me to be able to make the changes over the course of my life. And it's been a far more complicated process than that. But again, going back to why I created Transform Shadows, it very much is a problem that we can fix, and we can do that through dietary excellence and taking a look at the food that we are eating and how it matches what our design genetically and biologically has been. And that has been a really important foundational piece of the learning that goes on with me. And I think two other realizations that come out of that are that one is that I have to follow the rules of my hunger drive, not take different solutions and just slap them to who I am. And sometimes the answers are not what I want in
Right.
terms of the rules of my hunger drive. But when I live with those, I live a much more peaceful and positive and worthwhile life, because I feel so much better, because I am living in accordance with the way that in many ways with the way my body was designed to be. Now, of course, it's not going to be fully that way, because we talked a lot in our last episode about the idea of scarcity and how we were designed for scarcity. And the fact of the matter is that I personally don't live in a life of scarcity around food and that sort of thing. And so there is, there are some adaptations that are different in the way I was designed and the way that I'm living now. And I think that idea will become a theme as we look at some of the topics today. And so I'm wondering if you want to just talk a little bit about success, failure, and this problem based on what you have seen in terms of people adapting that healthy lifestyle, and what you've seen around success, failure, and specifically around eating when hungry, which is really the center of what we all struggle with, I think, when we are looking at this problem.
Yes. What you're going to hear over and over again is people making efforts, and you're hearing how it is that they went about something, and then they'll confess, they'll call me up and confess that they failed and they're really frustrated. And then very often people will quit, and they won't try for long periods of time, if ever again. They'll circle back around sometimes and try again. They'll tweak some things. And you will find, though, this is exceedingly difficult to do. This is highly reminiscent of my history with golf. Okay. It's actually a perfect parallel. So there are a lot of features as I think about this story. I'm pretty coordinated, so I'm not big and strong, but I'm naturally coordinated. And so I could always beat the other kids at ping pong, and I was a very good basketball player, which is, all fine motor skills is really kind of what this is. And So when I got to grad school, all the young men and the professors, we played basketball, and I could beat everybody. Yeah, it's not like they were that great, but the point is, that comes well easily to me. And so a couple of those friends that like to play, they played golf, and they were both quite good at it. And so they said basically, let's invite Doug out to play golf with us. And so I tried to join them, and it was extremely difficult. And I could not figure it out, but I was determined because I expected that I would be able to do this well. And that's important for people to understand because a lot of people that come into our space are actually bright and they have a lot of conscientiousness, or they never would have read a book by Colin Campbell or John McDougall. In other words, they're already motivated, they're already bright, and they know they've got a lot of self-discipline, or they wouldn't even try. So we're already talking about the cream of the crop here. And so in the same way that I was a naturally pretty good coordinated athlete, so I fully expected to be able to swing a golf club. Like, how hard can this be? And it turns out that leads me on a 7-year odyssey of unbelievable frustration. Okay. So literally for years, and then I'd go out with these friends and they'd try to give me a couple of tips, and I'd hit a decent shot, and then it's just all sideways for 7 years. I spent thousands of dollars that I really couldn't afford on buckets of balls after buckets of balls, swinging away at this thing, determined that I was going to be successful because I believed that I should be able to be. And that there'd be some old geezer out at the golf range, with a room temperature IQ, and that guy'd be hitting it just great. I'm like, cannot be that complicated. So 7 years later, on my birthday, I would have been probably 35. I finally went to a couple of friends of mine to a nice course on my birthday and just had a horrible day. And I remember on the 18th fairway that I basically, was in a mess. And I said, if I don't, I am going to get professional help. I am going to get professional help. And I am either going to learn how to do this, or if I can't do it, I'm quitting forever. I remember that moment to this day. That was 30 years ago. And so I did. I went looking. I lived in Dallas, and I went looking for a golf pro, and I watched them with their students. And I rejected a bunch of them. I didn't kind of like the tone or the explanations. And then I heard this one little lady named Mary Lou, who is really patient and seemed very describing her all the details. And I thought, okay, I'm betting my entire golf career on this one. You know what I mean? I'm going to do this. So for $40, I got, a 45-minute lesson. And at the end of that lesson, I understood the golf swing for the first time. But she didn't change everything. She just changed one thing, and I was immediately better, but I didn't have the whole thing. But literally in 45 minutes. So I come back after 1 week of practicing, elated, not I don't have the whole thing, but she says, okay, now we got to change the second thing because there's this other thing. And she once again explains the entire process. And in 2 weeks, I was good. Now this is interesting. Okay. So this was a 7-year odyssey of suffering, being led around by ignorance. And literally it took an hour and a half of instruction by the right person who actually had the correct information. This was amazing. Mary Lou Blocker, I think her name was. She had been an LPGA professional as a young woman, and she had studied under a famous teaching pro by the name of Manuel de la Hora, who had actually figured out theoretically swing mechanics. And so Mary Lou said, yeah, it looks like people do it differently when they're doing it correctly, but that's because of their differences in physiology. But actually, they're all doing the same thing if they're doing it right. And once you understand how to do it properly, you'll never lose your way. and it wound up being true. So this is a great example of I expect to do well. I try really hard, but I fail. That's like all the bright people that ever talk to me on the phone in their frustration about this problem. They are they've made quite a study of it. They've really tried hard, and yet they've failed. And it's because there's missing pieces of information. Mm-hmm. So what we are here to do is to try to, as you just pointed out, this was more complicated than you thought. That is exactly the point. It is deceptively simple looking. It seems like this shouldn't even be any, that's why you expect yourself to succeed and you beat yourself up when you fail. But what's happening is that you're like me for 7 years wandering on golf courses, incredibly frustrated, having intermittent successes, not understanding the whole picture of what the fundamentals are. So, yeah, you've coined a phrase that I've been stealing left and right over the last year since we first talked, which is that your thing is, I'm not broken, so I can't be fixed. I love that. You have no idea how I'm shoving that down.
Oh, I love that.
because this was actually the core message of the pleasure trap, which is that you don't have a pathology, your environment is pathological. Your design is working perfectly. You're in an environment that is completely not consistent with your design. So your instinctual reactions are incredibly confused. And that is the story. And as we talk about satiation, we're going to find, is you even talk about that in your own weight loss journey. What people should be hearing ringing in the background is that everybody else's solution for the problem is to basically restrict, weigh and measure, self-discipline over amount, push yourself away from the table, learn to eat less. All of these things are all about really restricting quantity, which is the superficial inference that every reasonable person would make. If you're overweight, you're eating too much. For God's sakes, restrict the quantity. Oh, if you can't do it, we'll hack out half your stomach and then you'll be able to do it. But this is literally what has been, and what has been missing is the fundamentals. It's like, no, you don't need to restrict quantity. Okay, what we need to do is we have to organize what it is that we're doing more intelligently so that we have a proper golf swing. That's actually what we're up to. So yes, we are going to wander into the weeds here in terms of the satiation mechanisms as we try to understand these, because because you have to understand we are trying to learn this so that we aren't seduced into the mistake which says I need to be weighing and measuring and restricting. Mm-hmm. This is we need to understand what the restrictions need to be as opposed to what our superficial inferences would have them be.
Yeah. Yes. There's so much that is really powerful about what you just said in terms of my own journey, and my interest will never be golf. I can tell you that. But I think that I can really relate to being fed up with not understanding something. And that really was what led me to getting my arms around this problem. I had success in the plant-based world in 2009. Fell off. I've talked about that in a different episode. It was with French fries. It would have been with something else at some point because I didn't understand myself from the inside out. And I think that's really one of the things that I want people to think about as they're thinking about their own journey, and the fact that you have to find your power in this space to do it, because Dr. Lisle can't do it for you. I can't do it for anybody. We all have to find our own way through it. And there's a science to that, and there's an art to that. And sometimes I think, as I've been really looking at things and messages around the weight loss world, not just in the plant-based, but the larger weight loss world, I think a lot of times people take the art of being themselves and try to make it the science for other people to follow. And there's a scientific body of knowledge here that I think we're going to get into today as we talk about satiation. And then there's going to be individual physiology and differences that you were talking about too. And sometimes those lines are blurry as I try to figure it all out for myself even. But certainly I've untangled that a lot more in my own journey. And I just want to say too that pursuing this knowledge is it can start with just like sitting for a while. Change sometimes takes a while, and people need to sit with the ideas for a while. And so if you're a person that is sitting with the ideas and just needs to think about them, that can be a pathway for change too. The thing that I would also say that comes out of what you were saying, Dr. Lisle, is that everything in our instinct is confused about finding the right way through this problem. And so we do need our intellect. We do need the mindset piece to connect the changes to our lives. And that does become, a psychological series of actions to lead oneself through those changes. And I think there are a lot of individual pieces as part of that psychological process as well that are really important to do reflection on and to look at periods, at least in my own life, when I've failed and when I've succeeded, and what I was doing and thinking differently during periods of success, and what I can learn from periods of failure. And so as we delve into satiation, I want to just take success and failure a little bit further into that. So in my own life, I created a lot of fires in my life. My analogy is about the fires I created around food. And the way that I live now is by building a slow burn fire of satiation that is lacks some of the explosiveness of the garbage fires that I was having in the standard American diet that were really big and exciting, food experiences, at least initially, but they were very short term, and they left me cold and in the shadows very quickly. And they also led me to searching in vain for other things. And I always use this phrase, going on the prowl. And that meant that I was looking for other foods and trying to fill a void in me that just wasn't ever fillable. I think a lot of times I confused that with an emotional eating piece, which is not unusual in society, I think. And when I realized how physical that process was, that was something that was really important for me. So now I recognize that I have a lot of agency in how I build that fire, a lot of power in building the right kind of fire for myself. And that comes in the food choices that I make that may be less exciting in the moment. But if I think about scarcity and absence, after the fact that I eat those foods, one of the things that is entirely absent when I am eating right for myself is that feeling of going on the prowl. And I've learned that I have a lot of power in that, in the choices that I make. And in that sense, I always have an action plan that I know works for me now, which helps me be able to act on my success. And so as we delve into satiation, this was something that I did not understand in my own journey. And I'm going to take it one step further before we get into it a little bit further, because it was really in working with you that I was struggling with a number of the features of my individual hunger drive, where I remember you saying, eat when hungry. And I was like, I think I am. But then I thought, I really don't know what that means. And I had lost half my weight at that point. And well, not quite half my weight. I was still in the weight loss process, but I had lost more than 100 pounds and had maintained that for a while and felt like I was flailing on a razor's edge, and still didn't have the knowledge that I needed to be able to feel like I could continue this process. And so understanding satiation was something that I didn't understand at that point. And Eat when hungry is an either or thing. And I have no doubt that if I were living in a time period of scarcity, that I would definitely not feel so many nuances around what eat when hungry means. But in this modern food environment, there's a lot of nuances and layers to understanding that have helped me be able to pull apart satiation. And so that's really what I want to take a look at today. And so as you think about satiation, is there an overall idea that you have that can help someone like me or others struggling with figuring out what satiation is? Is there an overall idea that you have that would help us with that process?
Yeah. There's probably many ways to think about this, but one of them is that well, it's known in athletics that if you're a professional team and you're going to go play in Denver, that you're going to get out of breath. Okay, so in other words, because there's less oxygen in the air up there at a mile high. And so but your body is naturally adapting. And if you play in Denver, that pretty soon there's little changes in your hemoglobin and everything else. In other words, that's why these guys that are trying to run these fantastic distance races will go train up high in order to get their body used to having less oxygen and therefore make these adaptations. The your body is, I mean, your mind and the way you work is you're extremely well designed to get these things right. So in other words, if you're not getting quite enough oxygen, then suddenly you're going to be breathing a little bit deeper, completely unconsciously. In other words, you will suddenly, if you go up to Pikes Peak or something, and we looked at how many breaths you were taking a minute and how much your lungs were expanding, it would turn out, oh, there's more lung expansion. You're now you've got 5% more breathing that's taking place. That's because you are seeking oxygen satiation. There's an appropriate amount of oxygen to be in your blood, and your mind simply calculates this. You don't have to calculate it with a pocket calculator. In fact, you couldn't. You literally just have an instinct that is reading cues from the body and then is motivating your behavior in ways that you don't even see. That is the same thing is true with your fluid intake. So you've got little parts of your brain buried in little specialized neurons in the hypothalamus that are monitoring whether your blood is getting a little too thick because you don't have quite enough water in it, or whether or not it's a little too thin and you're what do you call it? Hyperhydrated. In other words, we've all felt that at a drinking fountain in a gym, like when there's people behind us, well, just wait a second, I'm going to slurp up 4 more because I may not be able to get back here to get more. So therefore, then you walk away and you feel hyperhydrated. You're like, oh, I drank a little too much. So but what this is that there's never an exact perfect amount because it's always a moving target. If you're up at Pikes Peak, all that you know or that your brain knows is that you need to take an extra breath right now, and it needs to be about 5% more inflated in your lungs than it would have been if you'd be down in Denver. Okay, so literally, this is how subtle this is. It's literally a nanosecond by nanosecond adjustment process. And what happens is that a great deal of this is entirely unconscious. And so what people do not realize is that when it comes to their fluid intake or their oxygen intake or their food intake, these are basically being entirely run by unconscious processes. And you think to yourself, no, Doug, that's not true. I could have pushed away that shrimp and carrot cake. It's like, that's true, okay? And that is true. But if we looked at you over time, if we looked at over the course of 20 years, we would find a series of decisions that are constantly aiming and then readjusting and aiming and readjusting and aiming and readjusting. There is no moment when you are like satiated, that's it, we're fixed, because 1 second later you burned up a calorie just by breathing. And so now you're back, you're in a constant adjusting process. So all that can happen is that you could be reach moments of satiation in which you are mostly in satiated moments with respect to food for almost your entire lifetime. If you watch very carefully, you'll go hours and you won't be thinking about food. And so then suddenly a little set of neurons will go off, and suddenly it'll start occurring to you. Okay? It could also occur to you when you smell it. It's like, oh, looks like there's something available. So it winds up being a very complicated thing, but there's never, quote, getting it right. And one of the things that I try to get across to people that are in a weight loss battle is that they will say, gee, I don't know when I'm hungry and when I'm satiated. It's like, oh, yes, you do. Your nervous system will drive you to eat sooner or later. If you completely forget, trust me, it's coming. Okay? And not only that, you say, well, I don't know when I should be full. Yes, you do. Because sooner or later, you quit. And then what people are thinking is, oh, but I must be quitting too late because I'm overweight. And it's like, no, that's the mistake. That's the mistake in the golf swing right there. Okay? If you are overweight and not losing weight, it isn't because you ate too far past the satiation signal. That's not what happened. What is happening, the only way that you could be overweight is if you are, the satiation signals are beautiful. They are really good. It's like, oh, well, I soaked up too much oxygen at Pikes Peak, more than I needed. So therefore, now I need to like breathe less on my way down because I must have overdone it. No, you didn't. You were perfect. You were second by second adjusting all the way down. The same thing is true with your hunger drive. It's adjusting like crazy beautifully. The only reason why people get into trouble is that they're eating food that is unnaturally rich. That's where you can get into trouble. You can make babies blind by actually giving them oxygen on a what do they call those things? Incubator. If you do that to a young child, you hyperoxygenate them because you think it's a good idea for them to get oxygen. No, you'll cause blindness. You'll fool the mechanisms of satiety when it comes to that, and you'll actually do permanent damage. So you can fool these mechanisms when you give them environmental circumstances that they're not designed for. If you give people too oxygen-rich air, bad things happen. If you give them too nutrient-rich food, bad things happen. That's how it works. Okay. So the satiation, one of the big things that we're trying to get across here is, hey, you can trust the satiation mechanisms. You can't trust your food choices. That's the problem. Okay. Yeah. And so we can talk more about that. But yeah, I try to explain you can trust the satiation mechanisms, but you cannot trust your food choices. That's where we have to get conscious. We don't need to get conscious over the satiation mechanism because there is no satiation moment of perfection. It is inherently always a moving target in the same way that your oxygen requirements are. Your oxygen requirements are a nanosecond by nanosecond changing satiation mechanism. You just watch them. If I start talking too much and I get too excited, I have to then stop and take a bigger, deep breath. That's how it works. The same thing is true with animals with respect to their food, their sleep, and their temperature regulation. The cat just wants a little bit warmer. Oh, why is that? Because it would be a little bit more beneficial biologically. A little bit cooler, same thing. Okay, so just as there's no perfect temperature, you have a moment when you're like, oh, that feels perfect. But 3 minutes later, when you're talking and moving your arms around, oh, it's getting a little warm in here. It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
So we have to learn that, wait a second, we can trust the satiation mechanisms, and it's a job that's never finished. In other words, it's always a constant work in progress, what that feels like. But if we're having trouble, it's because we're we're choosing the wrong foods that are essentially disturbing the equilibrium of the system. That's what we have to be focused on.
And that's where, like, understanding scarcity, I think, has really helped me. And would not have believed as a previous version of myself how small quantities of some of those unnatural foods dysregulate my whole system. And I can feel the difference when I have those and when I don't. I use the phrase trigger foods because I do get such a sense of agitation from having those in my system that that leads me to want more and more and more of those types of foods, and has led me to overeat and to binge eat in ways that I certainly haven't wanted to throughout my whole life. And when those foods are removed, I feel like I actually have a fighting chance at this. And that gets me into another kind of area that I think is really interesting, where you talk about satiation as a moving target. And this is something that I am even really still struggling with right now a little bit, because for my whole life, my whole mindset has been, I have to eat less. I have to eat less because I've had to lose weight my whole entire life. And I am in a healthy weight range right now that, I kind of wander a little bit of a range, and that is a choice that I have made for myself, not to be on too steep of a hill for expectations. But the idea that I'm going to fluctuate and I'm going to eat more some days and less some days as part of that moving target is a very different way of living than the way I have lived my whole life, like decades of my life, thinking eat less, and understanding that I'm going to eat about the same quantity of food every day helps. But it's a little bit different issue than the fact that some days I'm going to eat more and some days I'm going to eat less.
Yes.
And I am still struggling with what that means a little bit, because it is so different than the way I have lived the rest of my life. And part of me wonders sometimes, when I have, a few more nuts than I should, or extra fruit, or extra something that I know maybe I probably don't need on that particular day. Is this what other people can do when they have, um, a few more potato chips on one day than the next, and they can like have maybe two cookies and not a whole bunch of cookies, which would be what I would have done in those situations. And that's that's a process of really figuring out. And it's not something that, once you have the scientific knowledge around it, that's a one and done type of thing. And so this is an ongoing thing that I'm still working my way through as I get more comfortable with that moving target of satiation. And I've been remarkably stable in my weight over the past couple of years. And I credit that to really delving into really working from the inside out to understand hunger in myself and the different dimensions of this process. But it is a work in progress. So that, I think, is something that, if there may be some people who want to and need to hear that sort of thing, that it is not a one and done type of process. It's like you were talking about with the golf, going back to, you make a change and then you work with it. You make a change and you work with it. And transform is a big word. And if you look at a picture of me and how I've transformed my shadows and lost more than half my weight, it's very dramatic, but it only happens through small steps, one small step at a time, one decision at a time, working my way through various different knowledge bases as part of, and personal change processes as part of that process. I want to talk about just to be really clear what supernormal foods are, because sometimes as I'm working with people, they'll tell me that they have a really clean diet and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And then when I ask questions about it, I find out that there might be, packaged vegan cheese that is part of their eating, or that there a lot of times sauces and salad dressings and some of the additives to very plain, whole natural foods might be causing them trouble. So could you just be really clear about what supernormal foods are from your perspective, since you've done so much work in this area?
Sure. Some neuroscience gal, sometime in the last 10 years, actually wrote a book that the title is Supernormal Stimuli. And I have not read it, but I read little bits of, review of it, and I thought, oh, great, somebody's got it all figured out, and someday I had to read. I think her name's Barrett or something. But what I'm going to go a little broader, and then we're going to come back now. And that is that animals are designed by nature to be sensitive to different stimuli in different ways. So if you're a person and you're looking at, I don't know, you're looking at a bird, from 40 feet away in the trees, it's kind of pleasant and nice to know. You're not terrified of it. Now, if it's a big old looking hawk, it's a little scary if it's staring at you. So how would you know this? Well, these are instincts. If you have a house cat, if you've ever noticed, if you pet them from behind, sometimes they can be a little upset. That's because they come from a line of little cats that have often been attacked by hawks. So they have a natural anxiety for that. And so that's just a little thing that you wouldn't know as a human, because you're not thinking about grabbing the cat and eating it, but some hawk does. So it's going to turn out that all creatures have particularly patterns of stimuli, either visual or smell or sound or kinetic. They can be either very positive or negative or neutral. So when you're looking at a couple of birds in the tree, it's pretty neutral to you. It's, there's no great danger, there's no great benefit. Now, if you see a blackberry bush and you can see a bunch of blackberries, or you see a bunch of cherries on the tree, oh, you like that. You got primate color vision, and you highly suspect that there's sugar in those things. And so and then if you smell it, if you smell a peach, you know that that's going to be a really good taste and that that's going to be really valuable to you. Nobody teaches you this. This is inside of you. And what these feelings are, preferences and fears, what they are is they are energy of some kind that is actually understood in the brain. The brain interprets the energy, whether it's light bouncing off of a predator, from 100 yards away, you're like, whoa, that's dangerous. You know what that pattern is. That is a scary thing, whatever that thing is. You're designed by nature to have feelings as a result. Feelings are a translation of, is this really good for me biologically, or is it bad for me biologically, or is it neither? And so you naturally just go through the world and you have, inside of the nature of the stimulus that's hitting your nervous system, you already have an innate calculating machine that tells you how good and how bad it is. And so it's going to turn out with food, when you take a bite of something, you have innate calculating capability that can detect sugar, fat, and salt and protein inside of there. And you have a sense of how concentrated it is. So if literally per cubic milliliter, as it's inside your mouth, your sensors can tell, just like a shrieking noise inside your ear. That's a bad thing. That's a sign of danger, and it could be a problem. In the same way, a soothing voice from somebody on a tape in a meditation retreat can be very pleasant, because the person who's singing or talking is clearly very relaxed. So we must be in an environment of very, very low threat. Okay, this is human human reaction to stimuli. Well, what we have found over the last 10,000 years is there's certain little chemicals or certain little stimuli that we're clearly reacting to them. In other words, they are of value. We're picking up a feeling. Is there any way to intensify it? Is there any way to make it more concentrated? If we can make it more concentrated, we're going to have a bigger reaction. Okay? So it's going to turn out that they've been chewing coca leaves for thousands of years in South America and have noticed a tiny little lift in people's mood, a little bit of an amphetamine-like process where you're a little bit more energetic, like a quarter of a cup of coffee. Okay, so guys will be chewing coca leaves all day long, working in the fields. They're just ever so slightly amped up, hardly at all, but they noticed it. There's just enough of effect that's noticeable. So, but in 1855, the geniuses somewhere, probably in Europe, figured out how to synthesize cocaine. Now you've intensified it. You took the little bit of chemical where there's a little bit in the leaf and you concentrated it by a factor of 500 and just got it down to that one chemical that really bangs the nervous system. And now we've got a disaster. Okay. So the intensification, it's a way to more intensify a stimulus. If you're going to tell a story, you can hear things in human voices if somebody's telling a story, and the timbre of their voice makes a difference. You can mimic that in a movie, watching, DiCaprio and Kate Winslet act it all out on the Titanic, but you can have a ambiance of music. And the music is actually an artificial intensification of the timbre of people's voices. And so as a result, it can super enhance the drama of the feeling. It's fabulous, okay? That's what instrumentation is. It's the intensification of our normal reaction to the emotional qualities of the human voice. That's what it is, okay? So your moms, when they're with their children, they almost always sing to them, whether it's in this, or they talk to them in a sing-song voice that really is communicating her emotional space. Well, we can do that with a huge orchestra, and we can intensify it and get people crying to Beethoven or whatever it is. So that's what supernormal stimuli are. So some of them are incredibly fabulous, and some of them are unbelievably dangerous. Mm-hmm. And they're all over the place. It depends upon what they do to the motivational system. And when we're talking about food and basically eating past what should be normal satiation mechanisms, people blowing right past that and binge eating and eating a lot of crap and even stuffing themselves way past the point where they're uncomfortable. That never is going to happen on whole natural food because that's not your natural design. But your natural design contains within it the possibility that every now and then there would be some rich food in your environment. Nuts, honey, meat. And so forth. At those rare moments, you should stuff yourself. And we did. That's in our instinctual system to do that. The problem is, what if you take things that are even more concentrated and supernormal than those things? Those things are normal stimuli, but they're rarely encountered. And therefore, when they're encountered, they are intensively sought, of course, until they're gone. And then you're not going to see them again for another 3 months. But what if we actually had stuff every day that was even more intense than that? That's a disaster. Mm-hmm. So that's actually the fight that people are having in the weight arena. It isn't that they're eating too much food. It's that they're eating food that's too rich. And then even past that point, I would also have to nod my head when people will say, no, Dr. Lisle, you don't know, I really do stuff myself. Yes, I understand that you do, but it's always on the rich food. Mm-hmm. I've never met anybody that calls me out complaining about how they stuff themselves and they're fat because they eat too many carrots. That person doesn't exist. Yeah. Right? I've had a few people that were bingers even on natural food, but they weren't overweight.
Hmm.
They just had some funny little quirk. I had some lady that ate unbelievable amounts of apples.
Hmm.
I mean, she wasn't overweight, but she definitely had a binge-ish, relationship that made her a little bit of an oddball eater. But it was not a weight problem. The weight problems come from the normal satiation mechanisms failing as a result of supernormal stimuli, the stimuli that has been artificially put together by human hands in order to make it extremely highly calorie dense. That's the problem. That's going to be potato chips, cheese, completely unnatural food, totally unnatural food. There's no cheese tree anywhere in nature. Okay, there's going to be refined carbohydrates, pizza dough. It's going to be ice cream. It's going to be all of these basically foods where fiber and water have been removed, because fiber and water are two of the five macronutrients. The other three are protein, carbohydrate, and fat. One of the things that we'll notice is that people will argue whether fat makes people fat or carbohydrate makes people fat, and protein always gets a pass. This is the normal modern debates on this. Nobody is focusing on exactly what the real problem is. They don't understand the Gulf swim. The real problem is fiber and water. It is the intensification of the fiber and water don't taste like anything. They have no calories in them, so we are not designed by nature to be responding to them with little pleasure centers in the brain recognizing the calories. So when you get rid of the fiber and water, you intensify the food. If we take an apple, that apple's 300 calories a pound. The calories in the apple are entirely a little bit of protein and a whole bunch of carbohydrate and like an infinitesimal amount of fat. Those calories in there are 1,800 calories a pound. The apple is 300. That tells you that 5/6 of that apple is a bunch of fiber and water. Almost all of that apple. That apple is basically fiber and water with a tiny little bit of sugar in it. That if we squeeze the apple and get rid of all the fiber and just have juice, and then we dry that juice out in a dryer and we get rid of all the water. So we've gotten rid of all the fiber and all the water. And what do we have left? Apple sugar. That apple sugar is 1,800 calories a pound, and when you taste it, it's massively more intense than the flavor of the apple. Okay, that is the intensification. That is the creation of a supernormal stimuli. That is what people are facing in their modern food environment, and that is why this is so difficult, because your taste signaling systems are telling you that's the right thing to be eating, and when you start to eat it, it will push you to eat. Not only will you overeat, you'll also often binge yourself as you call it, your garbage fire.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. That's
Yeah.
how that works. Yes.
Yeah. I have kind of an interesting story around perspective of food and shifts in some of the senses and that sort of thing. So I was traveling recently for work and went to a Whole Foods place and was able to get a smoothie. And I had wanted an arugula smoothie. Arugula isn't my favorite, but they didn't have some other choices. And I was looking to get a lot of greens in to help my trip go better. And so I asked for the arugula, and then I asked, well, do you have some nuts? And they had cashews. And so I said, well, just put a few in there. Well, my definition of a few is like 5 to 7. That's my perspective right now. And
Definitely.
literally think there must have been a half a cup in there, like
Yes.
in this smoothie that came back. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like, it was like a super normal food. It was so
Right.
rich with it because, of
Yes.
course, those cashews became butter as part
Yes.
of the processing. And I know that a smoothie is a form of processed food. So, and it was so rich, but of course I had it,
Yeah.
like I would never make it like that at home, but
Yes.
you know, I
Yes.
I enjoyed it for a while, but I thought this is really interesting because like my perspectives have changed so much as part of this journey that, when I think about having a few nuts, I really think about it in a small quantity of really 5 to 8 at a time to, and it helps me like some of the food better. I put
Yes.
a few nuts in my soup sometimes. I put a few nuts here and there, but not a lot any place. And I don't have a lot in a course of a day regularly. So once in a while I have more than I should. But anyway, I just think that's a kind of an interesting example of, a dimension of what you're talking about there, where, you know, we supercharge our taste buds. And
Yes.
I felt it then, even though it was, and probably the cashews had salt as well,
Right.
which I forgot
Right.
to ask
Yeah.
about because my frame of reference now is that cashews don't have salt on, and I forgot to ask about that. So it was super normal in that regard too. I want to get at something that I think you were talking about indirectly in some of the example that you just talked about with the supernormal foods. You talked about, well, you talked about it directly, but I'd like you to elaborate on the receptors in our bodies.
Mhm.
Because this was something that learning about the receptors in our bodies for the different foods, that was something that has been very empowering for me to learn because it helped me understand my differences from others around my size in a way that went into the I am not broken part of my own journey to understand that I was made this way, uh, and that this wasn't a fault of my mind, or the fact that I just couldn't get a hold of portion control or those messages that are part of mainstream society.
Right. The way I try to tell this story is to, if there's something I try to pound over and over again, it's the notion that you're beautifully designed. Your your design is almost certain to be effectively perfect. There are a few rare exceptions, but when you find somebody like yourself that was much heavier, I would have looked at you, 20 years ago and said, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with you. You're on the normal curve. You might be up on the high side of the normal curve, but high side of the normal curve is you're normal. In other words, everything's working perfectly. There are a few individuals out there in the world, 1 in 10,000, that are actually different. You know what I mean? There's something bizarrely dysfunctional about what's happening with them. But that is not, I have met one of those in my career. Okay, so the, but everybody else that I've met, the thousands of people, they're all normal. Now, every single one of those people thinks that they're the exception. Okay. So a great example is Chef AJ. Chef AJ said, I'm doing everything perfectly. I'm a vegan. Everybody criticizes me because I'm fat. And it's like, hey, AJ, that's because you eat chocolate peanut butter balls. Yes, but they're all organic and it's all natural and it's vegan. Okay. And this is, as you're talking about, vegan cheese. This is how we need to understand the mechanisms of satiation. The mechanisms of satiation are immensely complicated. They are by no means fully understood. But some fundamentals have come to light in the last 50 years of scientific research in this area. So some important things to know, and that is that there's two broad classes of satiation mechanisms. One of them is going to be what we call stretch reception, and the other is going to be what we would call nutrient reception. If you look at the scientific literature, they'll also call it chemoreception, in other words, chemical reception. So if you were to think about this, I like to tell the story about if I had some nephew named Louis, and when he was about 6 years old, what I'd give him for his birthday is I'd call him over and I'd put my hand in my pocket and I'd hand him a big bunch of change. Okay, so the very first thing he does is to actually feel how much he's got. So did I give him a little bit, or did I give him a lot, or is it somewhere in the middle? So his very first analysis is going to be, how much did you give me? The second analysis is he's going to look inside what's in his hand and see how many quarters and dimes there are versus how many nickels and pennies. If I gave him a whole bunch of nickels and pennies and a couple of quarters and a dime, he knows he didn't get that much. But if I gave him a moderate amount of stuff, but it was all quarters, he's like, wow, that's a lot of money. So this is exactly the way your nervous system is built. It has to know not only about how much did you give me, but about how valuable is it? Because it's not designed by nature to overeat, because that would be a biological mistake. Then you're exposing yourself to predators and competitors. You're not spending your time grooming your kids or mating. In other words, biologically, it is a waste of time to overeat, and animals don't do it. Biologically, it is a waste of life to undereat. You're making a mistake. You're going to starve. You're going to get weak. You're not going to be able to escape from predators or fight off a competitor. You absolutely do not want to undereat, but you absolutely do not want to overeat. You absolutely don't want to undersleep, but you don't want to oversleep. You don't want to underbreathe. You don't want to overbreathe. You don't want to drink too much water. You don't want to not have enough. This is what the mechanisms of satiation are. They're brilliant. They're incredibly, there's an incredible amount of information processing in that brain that is aiming at the satiation problems. The same thing is true of temperature regulation. So you are exquisitely designed. So basically, everybody that I ever talk to, my very first thing that I understand is, oh, there's nothing wrong with them. There's not a thing in the world wrong with them. Yeah, they're 50 pounds overweight and they're all bent out of shape about it, and they've been unsuccessful and they've tried 17 times and they failed, and there's something wrong with them. No, honey, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. That's the first place we start. Well, then why am I continually overeating? It must be because you're fooling the mechanisms of satiety. Okay. And so the way this works is that if you're designed to eat about, say, that much food in a 5-hour, 8-hour period of your life or whatever it is, if there is 1,000 calories in there, you're going to systematically overeat. But if there's 600 calories in there, you won't. The system is designed by nature to do what little Louis did, get a feel for how much you gave me. Now, so the stretch receptors, you can see those in the stomach. So embedded into the lining of the stomach and the muscles are receptors that actually can tell when you, just like there's stretch receptors in my cheek, if I do that. You felt them scream at you when you've blown up a balloon, and that balloon is, it's got so much air pushing back on you, it pushes your cheeks out and they hurt. Or some kid, when in school, they used to grab your arms and twist them each way on the skin, and you can feel essentially the tension of that stretch of the skin. You're like, uh-oh, you're gonna tear my skin, it hurts. The stretch receptors inside of your stomach tell you, hey, you've eaten about enough. That's what they tell you. Or they say, no, you haven't eaten quite enough yet. If there's food available, we should be eating some more. We've got room. That's how it works. You're not going to educate your stomach through a Jedi mind trick to tell you that you've had enough when you've only had 2/3 of what would be reasonable. Okay? So you eat that amount of what's reasonable, but the problem is the stomach doesn't know whether they're a bunch of nickels and pennies or whether or not they're quarters and dimes. It can't figure it out. That's for the small intestine. So now as food goes through the stomach into the small intestine, now in there, now that's the second look. The second look is, okay, I think we've gotten about the right amount of food, i.e., Louis feels like he's got about 4 or 5 ounces of coin here. That could be pretty good. Now it's going to look inside and see what it's made of. And so that's when it's going to look and try to figure out how much fat is in this food, how much carbohydrates in the food, how much protein's in the food. What is the calorie density of what it is that you just fed me? The thing is that this animal is more or less designed to get this right. In other words, that's why it feels different to you to suck down that shake that was full of cashews. You can pretty quickly feel like, whoa, that's a lot.
It was.
Okay. So you have the ability to actually have a pretty good feel for this, but we can make it we can overwhelm the the chemical receptive ability. It can basically be like, I'm not sure what you gave me, but you gave me a lot, and I think I've had enough. And the truth is, you had too much.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that is. And so because the system was never designed to be eating, say, a meal that was 2,500 calories a pound, there's no way that a human being could ever eat a meal of 2,500 calories a pound in nature. They could. Somebody could have basically come and handed them an enormous pile of nuts. But how often would anything like that have happened? And the answer is never. They would have had a few nuts now and then. Getting a nut is a really difficult thing. It's a pain in the neck. The squirrels are getting them. Then you got to take them down. Then you got to crack them open. It's quite a process. You're not just going to stick your hand into a bunch of nuts, particularly that have been then nicely roasted and salted. There's no way that that's going to happen. And then you're not going to whip it up in a device that makes it easy to eat and make it nut butter. So that is a supernormal stimuli of unbelievably high calorie density. But the closest thing that you would have ever gotten in human nature would have been a few nuts. But it's unlikely that you would have sat and eaten a meal of them. That's not how we're built. We can tell that's not how we're built because if we were built that way, the size of our stomach would be a lot smaller because we would have been eating far more concentrated food. We can tell how concentrated the food was of human natural history on an average day across the last million years. And that's that it was somewhere around 600 calories a pound or so. You kind of know that that's what it is. We can tell by the structure of the stomach when it takes people to feel satiated. So you can imagine if you eat 700 calories a pound, you're going to be fine. If you eat 500 calories a pound, you're going to be fine. If you eat 100 calories a pound, you're going to be in a weird situation where you're really full and you're bursting at the seams, but you're starving. You could not survive on a 100 calorie a pound diet. That's less. You could cram in 6 or 7 pounds a day of lettuce, maybe 10. You like a cow. You could chew it all day long if that's the only food that there was in the environment. But eventually you would starve to death because you can't live on 1,000 calories a day. So we're going to find out that the way this particular body is built, it's built for 600 or so. Modern human beings in America are eating 1,000 calories a pound. They're designed by nature to be 600 or 700. So an average woman burns about 2,000 calories a day. That means she should be eating, probably she's designed to be eating about 3 pounds of food, which is about what it is that she's going to eat. She'll eat about that on a natural history diet of about 700 calories a pound, 600 calories a pound. What is that? Natural diet would be a bit of meat, a bunch of potatoes, some vegetables, a couple of nuts, and once in a while some honey, and a bunch of fruit, etc. That all together is going to average out in the middle, somewhere around 600 calories a pound. So animal meat is about 1,000 or 1,200. Carbohydrates like potatoes and rice and things like that, those are about 400. So we're in the middle. We eat a few things that are richer, a few nuts, but then we eat some fruit down here at 300. It's a very high water content, intermediate calorie density diet. That's what it is. That's what the human eats. Now, you don't have to eat meat. You don't have to eat nuts. But the point is that all and around there, the whole mix winds up being somewhere around 600 or 700 calories a pound. America doesn't eat 600 or 700 calories a pound. They eat 1,000 calories a pound. Why? There's no fiber and water in their food. They're not eating apples and oranges. They're not eating rice and beans. They're eating cheeseburgers. Okay. So they're instead of eating some whole grain like some rice, they're eating wheat that's been dried out and processed and gotten rid of the fiber out of it, and now that's the bun. Okay. They're they're not even eating whole natural game. They're eating some cow that's been bred to be super high fat, and they've been put it through a grinder to make it really easy to eat and make it more efficient to eat. Then we put a slice of cheese on it. Then we put some mayonnaise on it, which is 4,000 calorie pound pure oil. By the time you're done, you've got something unbelievably concentrated. Mm-hmm. So when you do this, you're going to be eating diets that are 1,000 calories a pound. Some people are probably eating 1,200 calories a pound. This is now so far away from the 700 calorie a pound, 600 calorie a pound arena that we've now in that space of that pound of food that you're going to eat, you now haven't eaten 700 calories, you've eaten 1,000. So you do that 3 times a day, and you're not eating 2,000 calories a day, you're eating 3,000 calories a day. The average American woman eats 3,000 calories a day. She's designed to eat 2,000 calories a day. Okay? Of course, she's struggling with her weight. Her caloric intake is 50% higher than is normal. If you try to get her to eat something different, she screams bloody murder. Why? Because we're going from a richer diet to a less rich diet, and her instincts are telling her that's a mistake. So then the guru says, oh no, what you're going to do is eat less, just push yourself away from the table. You have satiation mechanisms that are telling you to eat 3 pounds. Even if you ate 2 pounds a day, you wouldn't lose any weight. In other words, now you're just going to maintain wherever it is that you are. The point is that dieting is a fiasco, as it's understood, all about restricting the caloric intake or restricting caloric intake by volume, by basically putting less food in the stomach, getting you a Jedi mind trick to try to have you eat less than you want to eat. You are in a chronic feeling of recurrent deprivation and a lack of satiation that is going to be, this is what I call losing your mind. You can lose weight, but you're going to lose your mind. And so what we want to do is lose weight without losing your mind. And that means eating a diet that is consistent with your natural history, that's around 600 or 700 calories a pound, that then you just eat when hungry, eat as much as you want, then you walk away in the satiation process. Don't panic because the food hasn't gone anywhere. So if you're hungry again an hour from now, go nibble on a little bit more. But don't be nibbling on the stuff that's 2,000 calories a pound. Mm-hmm. That's what the problem is. So yeah, those are the fundamentals, is that you can trust this thing in the same way that you trust your breathing. It's the same way that you trust your intuition about whether your hands are cold. It's the same thing about whether or not it's time to go to sleep. It's the same thing with your breathing, thirst. It's all satiation mechanisms. You are beautifully designed. We just have to trust that the design didn't somehow become nationally dysfunctional 75 years ago. This design, it didn't all go sideways in the last 50 years. Like, oh, it worked perfectly for 1,000,000 years, and now just suddenly it doesn't work anymore. I hear weight loss people saying, yes, well, the mechanisms of society aren't working anymore. People lose their ability. No, they don't. Those mechanisms do not lose their way. If you do this right and you eat the foods consistent with your natural history, your mechanisms of satiation will work beautifully.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much more peace that comes with that type of, I go back to the fire analogy. It's a long burning fire, and the peace that comes and the freedom that comes with building a fire that way has been a real release of psychological weight for me in the way that I think and feel about myself and how I'm eating and all of that. And I think you and I have talked about how that goes broader than just the physicality of the food. But I I continue to say that being morbidly obese and focusing on my health in the way that I do require the same amount of energy. It's just a very different expenditure of energy in how I am taking action, and the way that this is taking up space in my mind and my intellect and my body and spirit and all of that, because it is such a weight to think about what I should do versus what I'm doing. And it's, you know, sometimes taking action to always be prepared and to be a step ahead of myself in this modern food environment is a real challenge, but it is no more challenging than living with, I need to start tomorrow. And that is the mindset that I lived with for so long. And I think, too, understanding that to get to this point of peace and freedom, there is going to be a time where you have to live with the absence of the foods that are the supernormal stimuli. That's going to be a period of discomfort as you make that transition. And but there's a lot that you can understand about your hunger drive when you make those foods absent and scarce from your life. So,
Yes, it's such a big deal because people so often believe that the only way they're going to lose weight is through the feeling of being hungry and deprived.
mhm,
They are so sure that that's true. And that is the biggest mistake that there is. It's
mhm.
like, no, you don't. You have to make very careful choices about what you eat, but you can then get used to the fact that you can trust this hunger drive. Okay, you can trust it. And as you've watched, like, ooh, if you accidentally get things a little rich, you could see it gets a little bit more feverish. It's like watching the fire. Start. You throw something on that fire, and it gets a little hotter.
Yep.
You can see it. Oh, I could see it in myself. It's so obvious. The watching the motivation to eat feverishly is all about the calorie density.
Mhm.
I mean, that is absolutely the fundamental root of what's going on. And so, yeah, it's also something else that you said that I wanted to circle around to, and that is that I'm glad that you talked about how you you have a few cashews in the smoothie. Exactly, folks. This is we're not trying to promote, beans and greens and that everybody has to eat this unbelievably stripped down diet that's full of water and fiber and nothing else. It's like when I've heard some of my colleagues say, well, the diet's based around fruits and vegetables. It's like, no, it's not based around fruits and vegetables. Fruits are 300 calories a pound, vegetables are 200 calories a pound. Those are going to average 250 calories a pound. That is a long ways from human natural history. That is going to get people very, very frustrated. And then pretty soon they're going to have their spoon in a peanut butter jar and we're going to be in trouble. So, an intermediate way of doing things, understanding that, for example, if you're going to have a smoothie, there's nothing criminal about a smoothie. It's what's in the smoothie that matters. Years ago, there was a big upsetness between Dr. Esselstyn and the world about, is a green smoothie a good thing or a bad thing? And of course, to me, it was comical. It's like, well, it depends on what's smoothie.
Yeah.
That's like, it's like, well, is a popsicle a good thing, Doug, or not? Well, it depends on how you made the popsicle, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's nothing in the world wrong with the smoothie. Some people would say, oh, it's processed food, but it depends upon what it is.
Yeah.
And then you adding a little bit of nuts, which would have been absolutely consistent with our natural history to have some of that, and to have that. Now it turns out, we've increased the fat content and increased the calorie density. So now our taste receptors aren't saying, oh, well, gee, this is a bunch of 200 calorie a pound vegetable. They're picking up a little bit of fat in it. It's like, hey, this is more like 350 calories a pound. This is pretty good. but it's well within the normal ranges. And so everything's going to work beautifully. But that way, we're not thinking that we're supposed to be some devout religious human that is supposed to be absolutely eating this incredibly stripped down diet of carrots and celery. And this is how it is that we live. If you do that, you're cruising for a disaster. This diet has to have something that more mimics the natural history of our species. It isn't 200 or 300 calories a pound. It's 500 or 600 calories a pound. Okay. And of course, John McDougall has tried very hard to say, listen, eat these starches. And everybody's like, no, 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 no. Carbohydrates make people fat. It's like, no, they don't. They're 400, 500 calories a pound. They're beautifully within the human design. The problems we get with them is when you dry them out. You make them crackers, cookies, cakes. You do that, now you've turned them into 1,600 calorie a pound food instead of the 400, 500 calorie a pound food that they were the way humans ate them in nature, boiled in water and therefore breaking down the starches, i.e. oatmeal and cooked corn rather than a potato chip. Okay. So these are the lessons. But yeah, I'm glad that you talked about that so that people get the idea that this is an abstemious diet. In other words, it's lopping off a bunch of the supernormal, unbelievably rich food. And it's focusing here, but it's not focusing down here where it requires Herculean, bizarre self-discipline. It doesn't. It requires excellent self-discipline in an intermediate level, aiming at something that's consistent with our natural history, that feels good and regulates our biology beautifully. Yeah. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
We're not looking for thin air and we're not looking for rich air. We're looking for the right air.
Yeah.
And then things will look fine.
Yeah. And my smoothies are very, very vegetable based with enough fruit in and enough nuts in to make them good, right? Like I don't go overboard on the fruit because it's what you put in it. I know that, you know.
Well, anyway, that's a big day. I think
that's a big day. And I think we had some cutting out. We had some frozenness at the end there, but this has been a fantastic conversation that I think two resounding messages that I have around this is that one, there is a lot to learn and understand about it. I learned a lot from what you said today, and I feel like I went into this conversation pretty grounded in what I know. And then also, I think there's a lot of room for individual differences as well. And, you know, we'll talk more about that hopefully in an upcoming episode as well. So thank you for joining me today, Dr. Lisle.
My great pleasure. Always great to see you. I like working together, and I just love the talking with someone who's a systematic educator who actually walked this walk. See, I didn't walk it.
Yeah,
I didn't walk it. I've been walking alongside people and trying to lead them, but having somebody that has walked this walk and then can always quickly go back and reach for the things that, you know, that your own history, the turning points and insights that were important. That's just super useful for people to hear. I'm really happy to be a part of this.
well, thank you. I'm really happy we're doing it. We're getting some feedback that, you know, some people at least are finding it helpful. So that's always good to know as well. So until next time, thank you so much, Dr. Lisle.
You bet. We'll see you very soon. Thanks for having me.
Sounds good.